Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Maverick News Channel. So much to talk about tonight. Of course, we provided, pretty much wall-to-wall coverage of the resignation of the finance minister in Canada yesterday. More fallout from that today. And now the new acting or current, whatever you want to call him, finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc, who also has been dealing in his other portfolio with border security, kind of combined all that today to address the incoming Trump administration's concerns about border security and the 25% tariffs all in one. So he's kind of the right guy for the job at the moment, I guess, because he's been juggling the other portfolio leading up to this. And now with the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, a news conference held today, they have a new border security plan that will address the Trump administration's concerns, or so we're told. We may talk a little bit about that tonight. Also, a major figure in the Russian military, a general, has been assassinated inside Russia in Moscow. We have footage of that, and we also have a special guest who will join us tonight. David Wiley will offer some expert analysis for us and tell us what all of that means. And he'll also explore some of the other issues geopolitically surrounding Russia, Ukraine, the United States, NATO, the whole enchiladas. So stay with me. There's lots to unpack tonight as we dig into the top news stories of the day.
Someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Boy, talk about a media frenzy. Talk about the public worked up into a tizzy. I don't know when was the last time I've seen I don't know when the last time was I've seen anything generating this much excitement and interest. Everybody, just laser focused yesterday on the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, Canada's finance minister. And of course, now, because that's a major blow to the Trudeau government, people are very focused on what's Trudeau going to do. Headlines, major newspapers saying, Trudeau's got to step down. I saw a report earlier today internationally saying that Trudeau was going to step down and that the announcement was imminent within hours. And I thought, I bet you that's not true. It has not come to pass. So that's why I didn't report that. But that's how much of a that's how much mania is out there. I mean, talk about Trudeau mania. That's the phrase that was attached to Pierre Elliott Trudeau's campaigns and his whole prime ministership, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Well, there's a new kind of Trudeau mania, and the Trudeau mania that we're talking about here now is people hoping, wishing, praying, demanding that Justin Trudeau resign. Jagmeet Singh, NDP, Pierre Poilievre, all leaders of every party demanding that he step aside. The public also largely not on side with Trudeau anymore. 80% of Canadians, when last polled, show that they think he's the wrong guy for the job. And that mania, it's all being fueled by the incoming Trump administration, which continues, Donald Trump continues to snub Canada, snub our sovereignty, insult us, and yet a lot of people are like, yay, go Trump. I don't get it. He's demanding enhanced or better border security. Or else I'm going to impose a 25% tariff on everything. And he's threatening to do that anyway because he wants to renegotiate the USMCA trade deal between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that's part of the equation. And the Canadian government is responding. Premiers are responding. Every province is responding to Mr. Trump and his threats. Today, very short time ago, the federal government, under Dominic LeBlanc, the new finance minister, who I think took on that portfolio. I don't know if he really wanted it or not. But anyway, he's now rolled out this new border security plan worth $1.3 billion as earmarked yesterday in the fall economic statement, which, as the phrase goes now, blew through the guardrails where the former finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, had capped things at about 41 or 42 billion and was then pressured to increase that, and that's what happened, adding over $20 billion more. Now the deficit at nearly $62 billion, which is a Canadian record. 1.3 billion of that, though, going to border security, and that is because of, well, it probably needs to be done anyway, but it's being done because of Donald Trump. So if you're wondering why the money is being spent, it's because of Trump, and maybe out of necessity, but also it's not clear at this point exactly how that money is going to be spent. Nevertheless, here's the news conference. Let's go to it, and we will pick this up.
I'm very happy, obviously, to be accompanied by my colleagues, Mark Miller, Mary Ng, and Yara Sachs. Very happy that the President of the Canadian Border Services Agency, Aaron O'Gorman, is with us. C'est toujours un plaisir d'être avec le commissaire de la GRC, Mike Duhem. Je remercie le commissaire Duhem et la présidente O'Gorman pour leur travail au fil des dernières semaines et des derniers mois. Et je suis très heureux d'annoncer des mesures qui étaient dans l'énoncé économique de l'automne hier. Le Canada et les États-Unis entretiennent depuis des décennies un partenariat.
Let's get into the English. Hang on. Here it goes. Our new border plan, he says,
of $1.3 billion
$1.3 billion
will secure our border against the flow of illegal drugs and irregular migration, while ensuring the free flow of people and goods that are at the core of North America's prosperity. It's composed of 5 pillars: detecting and addressing fentanyl and its precursors, significant new tools for law enforcement, improving operational coordination, improving information sharing, and minimizing border volumes to the United States. I will lay out the measures pertaining to public safety, and my colleagues Mark Miller and Yara Sachs will speak to the measures stemming from their portfolios. To detect and address fentanyl and its precursors, we will invest in new technology, tools, and human resources. Our investments will enable the Canada Border Services Agency to deploy new chemical detection, imaging, and artificial intelligence-powered tools, as well as new canine teams to better detect illegal drugs at ports of entry. As well, Health Canada will ramp up their investigative capacity to be able to assist law enforcement in determining the source of the drugs and accelerate the regulatory process for banning these precursors. On the second pillar, which seeks to bolster our law enforcement agencies' ability to ensure the continued integrity of our border, we will invest in the deployment by the RCMP of a new aerial intelligence task force comprised of helicopters, drones, and mobile surveillance towers. This new task force will provide round-the-clock surveillance between ports of entry and complement existing foot and vehicle patrols. In addition, in the fall economic statement, we're proposing to expand the Canada Border Services Agency's mandate to allow border officers to legislatively inspect exports the same way they do imports, but enabling us to crack down on the domestic production and export of illegal drugs like fentanyl. In carrying out their mandate, the CBSA and the RCMP interact daily, and literally daily. The Commissioner and the President of CBSA talked to me about ongoing daily interactions with their American law enforcement partners. That operational cooperation is incredibly important, and we're always looking at ways to deepen that collaboration. That was the essence of my preliminary conversation with Tom Homan, the incoming border czar in the Trump administration. We discussed the importance of strengthening and deepening that operational collaboration. It's good for the taxpayers in the two countries, but it's also good for the public security of both countries as well.
Okay, so we'll dig into that more at a later date. Our guest has arrived in the back, so I don't want to keep him waiting too much longer. So I'm just going to kind of draw our coverage of that to a close for tonight. You're getting the idea. They are taking steps to address the border issue in response to the incoming Trump administration's demands. And with regard to Chrystia Freeland, now former finance minister who resigned yesterday, people are rejoicing because Freeland is gone. Freeland is gone. It's like ding dong, the witch is dead or something. For those of you who are not big fans of the Liberal government, fine. But people are very confused. They think that she's like gone. She's not gone. She's just stepped down as finance minister. People keep sending me these messages. So many people are confused. She's not in cabinet now. Trudeau offered, I'm just explaining this for all the people who are confused. She was offered another position within cabinet. She stated in her letter of resignation yesterday that she doesn't feel she has the confidence of the Prime Minister anymore. So she has resigned as finance minister. She declined the other position within cabinet. So she's out of cabinet, but she still has a job. And I'm being sent videos from streamers who clearly don't have any idea how things work, who think that she's now out of work or something and she's going to get a job at the World Economic Forum or whatever. No, she still has a job. She's still a sitting member of Parliament. All right? So she's still pulling down probably well over 100 G's. She just isn't going to be paid as finance minister anymore. All right. She represents the riding of University Rosedale, one of the more significant ridings in the Greater Toronto area, the GTA. She's not gone. She's still a member of the party. She's still a sitting MP. Even if Trudeau kicked her out of the party, she could still sit as an independent member of parliament. She's not gone. And she's not looking for work. I told you yesterday, she'll hang on. She will end up probably running in the upcoming leadership convention because it's so clear, it's plain as day. As I've been telling everybody for the past year, Trudeau's days are numbered. The pressure today is so intense. He is virtually being forced to resign by people within his own party. As you saw through the windows yesterday, as cameras were shooting through the windows as he was meeting with caucus members, sort of trying to be secret about it, couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were clearly unhappy. He's on the way out. He will stick around he won't resign over Christmas. He'll take his walk in the snow like his father did decades ago to make a decision. You wait and see. He was born on Christmas Day. He'll use that somehow, I bet you. He was born on Christmas Day with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he was anointed, but he's now done. The pressure within the party is mounting. He will make the announcement after Christmas, or maybe even during Christmas, as his father did decades ago. History.
Maverick News. The world is what?
And my apologies. Something happened to the internet. We completely cut out of the broadcast there for a short time. Apparently we went completely black, and it took me a minute to realize. So that happened the other night as well. But we are back live, and we still have a lot of people still hanging on in there. And our guest is waiting in the back room, so let's bring him in now. There he is. Hello, David. How are you tonight, sir?
Hello, Rick. I am doing well. How about you?
Just fine. Thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight. It's an absolute privilege. Really appreciate it. We're going to dig into a lot of things tonight. Russia, Ukraine, geopolitics in general, I think, and one of the most significant things we're going to talk about is the assassination of this Russian general.
Yep.
So what can you tell us about that tonight?
So Ukraine has wanted this general for a while. He's in charge of Russia's nuclear, chemical, biological programs. Their so-called defense that they've been actively using against the people of Ukraine. So for those who don't know, Russia, pretty much since shortly after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, started using chemical weapons on civilian as well as military targets. They don't really make a difference. And so this general has been wanted for a while for war crimes. And he's been, he's a general. He's been a safe distance away. He was in Moscow, living his good life, unlike so many other people over there right now. And Ukraine showed that, even in the very heart of Moscow, for high-ranking officials, that they can get someone. I pay attention to the Russian side of the news, Russian Telegram, and so on, and they are very upset about this, which tells me it sent just the message that Ukraine wanted. Because now those other generals or whoever replaces him, they're going to be a little bit scared that, if they cross the line, then someone may come for them too.
Right. So this general's name was Igor, and I hope I pronounce his name correctly here, Kirillov.
Mm-hmm.
And we have actual video of what happened to him. So it's my understanding that this happened in Moscow, only about 4 kilometers away from the Kremlin.
Yes.
And the method that was used by Ukraine to do this was a bomb planted in a scooter.
Yes.
So here's the footage, and we'll show the folks how this happened. And viewer discretion advised. It's not entirely graphic, but just so that you're aware, this does show the actual explosion as it happened. What is actually amazing here is that he really doesn't have any security around him at all. So that's the footage of the actual scene.
Yeah. For those who didn't notice, there's a scooter there right next to the doors. He comes out, and then a huge blast that immediately reached all the way across the street to where the video was being taken. So.
Yeah, and I was a little bit, I jumped the gun a little bit. Maybe we could just let people know a little bit about your background so they understand where you're coming from and who you are, because you haven't been on the program before. I kind of just took that for granted.
Oh, no problem. So I've actually been involved in political advocacy for 10 years now, starting in 2014. Most people know me because I ran for office in 2020, third party as a libertarian, getting 33% of the vote against a 16-year Democrat incumbent. So I made a few waves. People sat up and took notice a little bit. But in 2022, when I was running a second time, the full-scale invasion happened. And to me, this was very alarming. And I personally got involved helping people I knew who wanted to go over there and volunteer. That quickly died down. And then afterwards, I found that there was an interest in people wanting to know how they could advocate for themselves politically, with Americans saying, hey, this is how we feel about the issue. We want to make ourselves heard. And so for the last couple of years, I've been active with one organization, Ukraine Defense Support, as a political advocacy coordinator, helping people reach out to their representatives and senators and let them know that, Americans really do care about what's going on in the world. We want to live in a world of peace and not have the world torn up by another series of wars. since then, I've also become a coalition engagement lead, kind of broadening this beyond just the Ukraine issue, because there's a lot more at stake than just Ukraine. Some people aren't too aware of it, but hopefully in the news now, people are more aware that Russia, has been stirring things up in Syria. They're behind the unrest in Georgia. There recently was so much involvement in the Romanian elections that the courts threw the elections out and are basically doing it all over again. So Russia has been engaged in what's called hybrid warfare. They don't really see a difference between actively shooting people and the information war, right? To them, it's all the same. So they use information against their enemies, and they use bullets and violence against their enemies. And they're very much involved in that. And that's happening here in the US. People need to realize they treat us very much as an enemy. And while they're not shooting at us right now, thankfully, it is full on with the information warfare from Russia. Everyone, whether you realize it or not, has already been subject to it here in the US, because Russian information warfare is pervasive. You do not escape it. You are hearing their lies repeated from one voice to another to another. And, they've been at it for a long time. I know a lot of people say, I often hear, oh, but CIA. I realize this is a game that Russia has been involved in long before we even started up the CIA as a counter move to the KGB. So yeah, they are by far better at it, and we need to be aware that this is not just an idle game. Russia's not sitting back and ignoring us.
Yes, well, it's becoming very apparent to me that they are engaging in this in highly sophisticated ways, using a combination of technology through social media and even psychological manipulation. It's extremely effective, and it's not just that; it's also the way they're using money. I understand just that they've invested just in the last few years like $45 billion on information warfare. Is that an accurate assessment, or am I seeing things incorrectly?
No, if anything, it's a lot more. That's just what we know about. And definitely for sure, it's more than that. Russia has a lot of covert money streams. It's not just taxes. Estimated 20% of the Russian government budget is estimated to come from criminal activities, largely in Africa and other places, smuggling gold and platinum. And they fund a lot of activities covertly using that, often changing it into cryptocurrency so it's not tracked. And they're buying a lot of people who don't even know that they're bought, for that matter.
And what do you mean by that, when people who don't know they've been bought?
Oh, so recently, for those who aren't aware, there was the U.S. federal government indicted Tenet Media. The heads of that company were knowingly working with Russia, but they were paying YouTube personalities and other media people indirectly to spread Russia's message for them, right? So those people may or may not have been aware, but without a doubt, Russia was paying for content and it was getting delivered the way they wanted, right?
So what you're saying is, if a streamer was producing content that echoed Russian information or propaganda, either because the streamer believed in it, or just because they were repeating what they were told, or if they were being fed the information, any of those things, they would funnel money to people who were doing things like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and while those people might have a certain organic reach on their own, in certain cases, Russia was paying $100,000 a month to a particular YouTuber to increase their reach and elevate their name and their content because it was very pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine.
I see. So they would like dump money into like a YouTube or a Facebook account and boost it and take other measures to kind of send traffic to it, to elevate it in the algorithms to get it a higher profile. Is that kind of what they were doing?
More than that, they were giving money to tenant media, and then this media company was promoting these individuals, all of the normal ways that you do media promotion. And so it looked kind of normal until you asked, well, where's all this money coming from, right? How does someone who does a moderate amount of YouTube videos get this much money?
Yeah. And then when that was revealed, I noticed that the Russian information machine got cranked up right away, and you could start to pick out the people who were on the Russian side because they were all saying, this is all BS.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Right. And to pivot back to today's assassination of this Russian general, I've seen the Russian information machine cranked up today as well, with some of these pro-Russian streamers out there saying that this was illegal. This was an act of terrorism, echoing what we're seeing on Sputnik and RT, and then taking it even to whole new levels, saying that it's the Ukrainian government's a criminal regime, that the United States is also to blame, and because they're backing an illegitimate criminal government engaged in international terrorism. And in my view, that in fact, the first media report that I received from someone who sent it to me asserted exactly that this was some sort of act of terrorism. And I was like, what do you mean it's an act of terrorism? They targeted a Russian general who is an active participant in war, and it was focused on that target, not civilians. I don't get the argument that this is terrorism or a criminal act.
It's not about arguments. The thing about Russian propaganda is it's the fire hose of lies, and they throw everything out there. And if one lie is defeated, you take all the time, you do the research, you prove it wrong. They've got 100 more ready to go. And the idea is just to exhaust the people who are trying to bring out the truth, right? Because you can't keep up, right? And so even though you've defeated a lie, you've proven it wrong. And there have been so many from the beginning of this, right? With the beginning of, it's hopeless. It's 3 days to take Kyiv, capital city. And here we are more than 3 years later. And obviously it wasn't hopeless. It was never hopeless. But it doesn't matter because there's always one more lie behind it. And the trick for that really is to understand is that when someone's discredited like this, you need to stop listening to them, right? If someone's lied to you and they're shown lying repeatedly and they don't correct themselves from that mistake, you just have to stop listening to that person, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has been wrong, and that's okay. But there's a difference when someone has spread misinformation or disinformation. If it's unknowingly, then they correct it. Like, I made a mistake. I trusted the wrong people. I listened to the wrong voices. Mm-hmm. And that's great. But there's a large number of people out there who get it completely wrong. They get caught in the act, and then they spin another lie. And they get caught in that one too, and they spin another lie. And at a certain point, people just need to wise up and stop listening to these people. Stop listening to the statements of known liars. And all of the Russian mouthpieces, they're all known liars. They're not there to tell you the truth. They're not there to inform you anything true. They're not even trying to bring their side or perspective, right? They'll bring you 100 different sides, and the idea behind Russian deception is that none of them are true.
Well, how many times have I heard these pundits, these Russian mouthpieces, say that the war is going to be over in a week or a month or whatever, and then that it's the same thing. The sky is falling, but it doesn't. And I guess the objective in doing that is to demoralize us and undermine support for the Ukrainians, so that we basically stop funding the war, so that Russia just wins by default. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wearing a shirt today. You can't see it, but it's a quote by one of America's founders, Thomas Paine, that the power of despotism lies wholly in the fear of resistance. And that's what Russia is trying to spread all over, one way or another. Be afraid of us, be afraid of us, be afraid of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people believed before this full-scale invasion that Russia is unstoppable, the second greatest military in the world. And they're choking on a nation that is a quarter the size of theirs, right? Fully over 80% of the Russian military is committed in Ukraine, and they are not winning, right? This is a 3-year slog. They are grinding to a standstill. Now I track maps where, okay, Russia's advancing in Russia. Like, wait, you're advancing in Russia? What happened to, this great victory that now we're tracking Russia advancing inside Russia, right? So it's ludicrous, but they've managed to spin for 3 years that Russian victory is inevitable and it's imminent, and you're going to get it just now because of this.
And the Russian narrative always seems to be that they are the victim, that they're the ones facing the existential threat,
Yep.
right? And yet it seems like Vladimir Putin has been the author of this of his own destiny, because by invading Ukraine, he now actually does have Ukrainian troops on his own soil, that which never would have happened if he had not invaded to begin with. What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. Ukraine is, it's a smaller country. They've never invaded anyone in their history. They've never had the aspirations. Ukraine used to be the third largest nuclear power in the world in the early 90s. And they voluntarily disarmed, right? Because during the collapse of the Soviet Union, they wanted to pursue wealth and prosperity instead of war. And, that's an admirable thing. That's one of the reasons why I personally support Ukraine, is because of the importance of nuclear non-proliferation. I do not want to live in a world where every dictator, every national leader feels the need to have nuclear weapons in order to defend their country, because that's a very dangerous world where any madman can set off a nuclear war. And it's bad enough with Russia using chemical weapons and other, nonstop violations of Geneva war crimes. But that has to be deterred. I believe personally that, we need to be supporting Ukraine materially. I do not want to see American troops in there. I think we need to hold that back as a nuclear deterrent. America will stay out personally until you get nukes involved. But we're going to, per our treaty agreements, secure Ukraine against assault from other nuclear powers. So we will send them the weapons they need. And honestly, one of the things I've spoken with congressmen and others, like, this does not need to cost as much as it is. The U.S. has huge military inventories. We have lots of stuff just sitting in deserts, gathering rust that can be turned over and used. And a lot of what Ukraine is using, it's not, very little of it is current military equipment. It's mostly old Cold War stocks.
Yeah.
And what most people don't realize, a little dirty trick, is that half of military spending, and it's a lot, they just passed a military budget of $900 billion for this next year, half of that goes to maintenance. Fully half. Just keeping our inventories up. And one of the number one threats the USA faces, one of the number one reasons we have those inventories, is Russia, right? They are one of the main threats to America that we're prepared to counter. So send the equipment to Ukraine, let them fight Russia, and then we don't ever have to, right? Then we can even draw down our military as the Russian military is destroyed. We can reduce our spending, we can focus on other things. That's not quite the message that a lot of them like to hear in DC, but it certainly helps with some to see that, okay, yeah, there is another way of doing this. We can support things. And I have, succeeded in getting a lot of these old inventories marked for sending over to Ukraine. And one of my proud accomplishments that I've worked there is that the U.S. has a lot of this old ordnance, and 99% of the cost of a missile is in scrapping it, because it's hazardous material and it's dangerous work. And for less than a penny on the dollar of scrapping it, we send it to Ukraine, they use it, and instead the money that would have been spent to destroy it is spent on making new equipment. So it's just a win-win situation.
So when I hear talk like that, and as soon as you start to talk about dollars, even if it's about saving dollars, the argument, and I'm not even looking in the chat because I'm afraid to right now, but I can pretty much guarantee there are people in there on these various channels saying, just proves that it's just about making money, and it's the CIA and the U.S. government just trying to profit from war. What say you?
Those are actually, the lobbyists for the military industry are actually some of my biggest opponents in DC, because having Russia as a threat is why we just went up another $100 billion in military spending this year, right? So the bigger of a looming threat Russia is, the more we invest in U.S. military equipment. And the idea of Ukraine winning decisively over Russia, we don't even talk about that in DC, because that idea frightens them. That means a long-term reduction in military spending, right? So that's what they don't want to see. They're like, you can drag this war on out, fight it to the last Russian, but don't destroy Russia. Don't let Ukraine really win, because then you're driving us out of business, right? They need a foreign threat in order to keep that military going. But also people need to realize that even those lobbyists, and I'm not a lobbyist, by the way. I introduced myself as an advocate, and the big difference is that I don't get paid. I'm a volunteer. I'm helping other people to speak to their representatives and congressmen. A lobbyist is someone who gets paid for that work, right? Yeah. And the military industries are actually even smaller. The profit margins for Raytheon are less than Johnson & Johnson gets for diapers.
And yet Russia is a country that relies as much or even more on military production and sales of arms abroad to support its economy. How big of a deal is that for the Russian economy?
It was big before, but now Russia has scaled itself entirely into a wartime economy. So I've seen some economists say that Russia has to keep the war going at this point because they have no other economy. That's it. With the collapse of oil in Russia, and they have let that industry completely collapse. They have not done the maintenance. So even if the war ended tomorrow, they could not turn their oil industry back on the way it was. It's done. Putin has fully committed Russia to a wartime economy. That is it. That's all they have. And in typical KGB fashion, he doubles down. So everything is in on winning this war. Everything is in on continuing war after it, right? He is not prepared to pivot to a peacetime economy, even if he wins in Ukraine. So it's the full socialist model. He will consume Ukraine. He will consume all of its resources. He will consume its people. And then he will move on to the next conquest because he has to. He has no manufacturing anymore that isn't military economy.
And
in fact,
sorry, go ahead.
They shut down the last of their furniture. They shut down just within the last couple of days. They shut down housing development. No more bank loans for it. So those industries are dead.
Yeah, their economy is very focused on the military and sales abroad. In fact, here's a promotional video for Rostec. People talk about Raytheon and the big corporations on the U.S. side, but this is the stuff that these guys are getting
Жизнь
into.
человека неразрывно связана с технологиями. Прогресс в науке и технике дает человечеству новые возможности. Ростех – это лицо новой России, неизменного мирового технологического лидера. Мы совмещаем крепкую научную школу и богатый опыт прошлого, уверенно смотря в будущее. Компьютеры изменили стиль нашей жизни. Как мы общаемся, учимся, создаем и исследуем мир. Ростех – это большая лаборатория по созданию умных технологий, от сверхпроизводительного микропроцессора до построения сложнейших сетей и системы ГЛОНАСС. Подъем человека в воздух навсегда изменил отношение к пространству и времени. Ростех создает тысячи элементов, которые заставляют самолеты и космические корабли отрываться от Земли. Мы запускаем сердца, конструируем крылья и даем разум крылатым машинам. Человечество продолжает исследовать, что находится за пределами нашей планеты. Создавая инновационные технологии для космоса, мы прикасаемся к тайне космической материи и неизведанного мира. Мы всегда стремимся увидеть больше, изобретая новые световые и оптические устройства. От медицинских кабинетов до астрономических обсерваторий наши технологии позволяют видеть мир на уровне мельчайших частиц и обследовать объекты, находящиеся на расстоянии десятков миллионов километров. Сверхточные электронные системы позволяют видеть то, что недоступно человеческому глазу. Наши технологии помогают обеспечивать движение машин в воздухе, на земле и в океане. Бортовая электроника создает условия для работы пилота и сохраняет безопасность пассажиров. Российские вертолеты – признанные лидеры мирового военного и гражданского вертолетостроения. Наши авиатехники по праву доверяют более чем в 100 странах мира. Наши разработки доказали свое превосходство не только в воздухе, но и на земле. Современные грузовики КАМАЗ преодолевают расстояние в сотни тысяч километров. 13 раз подряд гонщики за рулем автомобилей КАМАЗ побеждают в ралли Дакар. Отточенные победоносные решения мы используем и в военных технологиях. Россия – один из лидеров по экспорту вооружений. Автомат Калашникова – это мировая легенда. Но время не стоит на месте. И сегодня мы гордимся современным оружием и футуристической амуницией. Ростех расширяет возможности каждого человека. Ростех.
That's Rostec. They don't talk so much about that stuff. When I see that stuff, yeah, that concerns me. That's what we're up against, right?
Yeah. And to answer, the question you posed about microchips, Russia can't build them. Most of the stuff they're showing off in that video, they no longer have the capability to build. And they're smuggling it into their country. So a lot of it's actually American components, because people don't realize how global logistics works. So microchips that we made 5 years ago are sitting in warehouses in Thailand and India, and Russia sends shell companies to go buy them and have them sent through Central Asia on up to Russia, to avoid sanctions.
Right. This is what drives me crazy over here, is when I hear people echoing the Russian talking points, which is all about everything is our fault. It's always the CIA to blame, and behind every problem. But they never question what Russia is doing. There's no balance in the narrative that they're absorbing. People are caught in this giant echo chamber, this information echo chamber.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was talking a little bit about the KGB, which has now rebranded itself to FSB, but it's the same people, same organization, same methods. And as opposed to the American model, where our intelligence agencies, the CIA, everybody knows that they're involved primarily in spying, in espionage. But over 80% of the FSB budget goes to influence, spying is actually a minor side game for them. They're less about information and more about disinformation, right? Deceiving you. So, okay, sure, you have this information, but we're going to put garbage information in there, not just to your experts, but to your society as well, right? And just flooding people with disinformation until you're unable to make a decision in your own personal best interests.
And from the research I've done, and I'll get you to comment on this, is the objective to undermine confidence and trust in our public institutions?
It's more than that. It's actually to set us at odds with each other. I come from a libertarian background, so you'd think, oh, well, they would, if that was the case, they'd just be funding, all libertarians, and that's not the case at all. They will actually fund extremists on every wing because they want conflict in the USA. Mm-hmm. So radical leftists, the radical right, extreme libertarians, extreme Marxists, those are the people who get the funding because and they even want them to fight with each other. The people that they're funding, if those groups are fighting, if they're creating chaos and violence and disorder, that's what they want, right?
Yeah. Can you explain, or do you know how the money is funneled, or maybe the real word to use is laundered?
Yeah, so some of the obvious parts is through media deals, right? So like if you're a Russian agent, then, the FSB is going to sell a book for you in Russia, and they'll do a print run and nobody will buy it, but you got paid for a book. That's innocent enough. That's not breaking US laws. You got a book deal, right? So that's one way. Or it can be other media deals, like, we're going to pay you $20,000 to spend 5 minutes on Russia Today, right? And that's, again, that looks legitimate, but what they're really paying for is the message that they're spreading when they're not on Russian media, right? Like, okay, you're going to talk to us, we're going to tell you our talking points, and then you're going to take those back to your home country's media, right? And it's not just the USA. So it's all around the world, Europe and the USA, even Canada in particular.
Now, again, I'm afraid to look in the chat. I am going to look in the chat because I bet you there are people in there saying that you're a liar and you're full of crap. Anyway, but it is about lies. It is about disinformation, misinformation, and it goes back to and we'll pivot back again to this general who was just assassinated. The information warfare machine tonight on the Russian side is saying that killed Killarov.
Mm-hmm.
He is the guy who was exposing the U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine, and that's why he was assassinated, because the incoming Trump administration needs to have a clean slate, and they want him executed so that that's taken care of before Trump takes office on the 20th. I've looked into those claims of biolabs, and they're exaggerated at best and just straight up lies at worst, because every country has biolabs of some kind, and the references made to these biolabs are accurate, but it's what was going on in those biolabs that was important. And the research I've done indicates that they were basically there for medical research, not for the development of military bioweapons. What would be your response to these media reports tonight about this guy here being the general who has exposed, what's the caption say, a network of more than 30 biolaboratories in Ukraine?
So this is public information. You can look it up. It goes way back. Those biolabs were actually built by the Soviet Union, right? Those 30 biolabs. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the concern by the US government in the 90s, right? And this was a very real concern. It's like, okay, where we had one enemy, the USSR, now we've got 15 different states. We don't know what they're doing. Many of them have nuclear, biological, chemical weapons capabilities. So the U.S. government made a deal with Ukraine. They also gave it to Belarus and I think some other countries that, look, we know you're poor after the collapse of this. We want to make sure you're not building biological weapons. We're going to give you some money if you let us come into these labs and audit them. And those audits are public record. You can look them up to show that they really are biolabs, because a biolab is completely different from a bioweapons lab. You need completely different equipment in there, right? So you need one set of equipment to do blood tests, if you're checking for coronavirus or whatever it is. And you need a different set of equipment if you're containing a lethal pathogen and trying to weaponize it in aerosol and so on. Completely different sets of equipment in your lab facility. And so we go in there once a year and say, yep, this is regular biological lab equipment. And any of you who live in a major city, you can Google biolabs in your own city, and you'll probably find as many. I'm in the Seattle area, and there's many biolabs here as there are in all of Ukraine. So, and again, those are places where you go and get blood tests, you go and get urine tests, so on. They're not places where they're developing biological weapons.
And in fact, Russia has quite a number of biolabs of its own. And during the Soviet era, they were involved in the development of biological weapons. And this general is accused of actually using, and that, again, maybe you can elaborate on it. What is it he's accused of doing to Ukrainian troops?
Not just Ukrainian troops, but he was directing ammonia-based weapons against population centers, so against cities. So what's called a vacuum bomb, and it takes the air out using ammonia, and it poisons the air. And it's devastating to the lungs even of the people who survive. And so on the Eastern Front, he was bombarding cities with this. And that was one of the reasons he was targeted by Ukraine, is because of leading those war crimes.
Right. And that is an actual war crime. I would submit, in my view, testing weapons, new kinds of weapons like this Oreshnik missile on living human beings should probably also be a war crime if it isn't. But that's what he has been doing. But I guess that's also, he was trying to send a message, I guess, by sending in the hypersonic missile. And do you think that has been effective? Has it pushed the supporters of Ukraine back on their heels or not?
No, I haven't seen it have any of the effect that they wanted. Particularly since it looks like he's decommissioning nuclear missiles to turn them into conventional missiles. It's actually showing a form of weakness. Like, okay, if you have a nuclear capable missile, you keep it ready for that as long as you have nukes that work. And that's the big question, because it's not believed that Russia actually has that many functional strategic nukes. They have lots of smaller tactical nukes, which are a threat to Ukraine, but not to the U.S. For the U.S., we worry about the strategic nukes, the big ones that are put on ICBMs. And Russia backed out of what's called the START Treaty. This was where both countries agreed to limit the number of, nuclear-ready missiles we had. But before that, because both sides could audit each other, and these audits are public report, you can go in, look them up, Russia did not have the maximum number of missiles that were allowed under the START Treaty because their warheads were shown to be decaying in obvious ways. Nuclear weapons material can degrade very easily, actually, if it's not protected. Because I have an engineering background and biology background, so this is some of it, but basically it's not just enough to have uranium. That doesn't make it nuclear grade uranium. You have to take those molecules, and it's basically like racking up cue balls for pool, right? So that when you hit one, it causes a chain reaction to all the others. If you just have a bunch of cue balls spread around your pool table, you're not going to get an explosive reaction. So you've got to got to rack them up. And if you get a little bit of water in there, it splits them all up. And American auditors were going in there and finding, oh, these moisture seals have failed. So you no longer have weapons-grade uranium on this missile. That was actually believed to be one of the main reasons they may have backed out of the treaty. Wasn't because they're making more, but because they wanted to hide how few they had that still worked.
You mentioned the START treaty, but I also hear references made to other treaties, and on the pro-Russian side, the narrative is always that, oh, the United States pulled out of this treaty, it pulled out of that treaty. But if you go back and if you really research it, there are always reasons why the United States has pulled out of these nuclear arms treaties. Donald Trump pulled out of a treaty when he was president the last time, and that was because the Russians were refusing to allow inspections to verify. So he said, well, it's not something that we can be part of then. So that's why the United States pulled out. But you never hear that other side of the story.
Yeah, and you know what? If you don't want to abide by a treaty, the honorable thing to do is to back out of it, to give formal notice, so on. It's like a business contract, right? In any world of business. But look at Russia. They invaded Ukraine. Well, more recently, they've broken Minsk 1, Minsk 2, which is ceasefire agreements. They never held them for a day. But those only matter because they broke a series of peace treaties with Ukraine they had before that. So, treaties with Russia are only as good as you have the military power to deter them on your side. That's what everybody's taking away from this Ukraine invasion, right? And it's something we need to be aware of as well. So, and the option to me is, I do not want to get into another arms race. I already lived through the end of the Cold War and how we're continuing to break our economy from that. I want to go the opposite direction. I would like to see arms reduction. And the only way to do that is if someone eliminates these threats like Russia. I would rather that Ukraine be the one to eliminate them using the material that, hopefully we don't need in the future.
Yeah, and people here keep saying, well, they're just... Well, Trump has even said Zelensky's the world's greatest salesman. Every time he shows up, he walks away with another $20 billion. And I just had somebody on the program last night, which I didn't challenge because we were talking about other political things. But he says, I wish that we could get our $20 billion back from Ukraine for the Canadian government. But when I listen to these arguments anymore, I mean, I have to confess that early in the conflict, I was kind of buying into these arguments that I heard coming from people who appeared to be very credible to me, like Professor John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs, professor, and others. But now, to me, these arguments don't really stand up. They never really did, but they sound pretty good in the beginning. But it's not as simple as it's just it's just us trying to profit from this. Or, in fact, they want it both ways. They make it sound like somehow we're making money hand over fist and profiting from the war, but then on the other side, it's like we can't afford it. It costs us too much. So, like, which is it? It doesn't make sense after a while.
It doesn't have to make sense when you're just inventing all of it, right? And when you're like the Russian, media talking points, if you just make it up, you don't have to worry about it making sense. But it doesn't help that, our side, our politicians aren't really making sense either, because they have been playing a numbers game with this since day one. Part of that is because a lot of the Democrats want to appeal to their base. And that is, oh, we're spending all this money on your behalf. So they keep making the numbers look bigger than they are and not questioning, okay, well, where's the money coming from, right? Where's the Ukraine tax? That's what I often ask people. Like, oh, I'm paying too much money to Ukraine. What Ukraine tax are you paying? Right? Have your taxes gone up because of Ukraine? No. Our taxes have stayed steady these years. So where's the money coming from? And most of what's all has been announced is just accounting gimmicks, right? So this week, I'm sure Biden will announce another aid package to Ukraine, and he'll put a dollar figure on it, but that's not pallets of cash going to Ukraine. That's the assessed dollar value of the equipment, right? So that's like an old car that you're writing off to a charity.
Yes.
Basically what's going on. So, oh, hey, I gifted $5,000 to this charity I love. No, you didn't. You gave them your old junker car, right? And that's what we're doing. And the fact is that the alternative for that old junker car was taking it to the dump and paying someone to dispose of it, right? And in the case of the U.S. military, that disposal was a lot more expensive. So the ones who are actually getting the money are the U.S. defense contractors. They're getting the money to replace what they would have gotten for scrapping equipment to make new equipment, which is still, at least we're getting new stuff. I would rather see a reduction in what we're spending, but if we can't do that, at least give me the new stuff for the price of just throwing the old stuff away.
That's why, and I've just reached the end of my rope with RFK Jr. One of the reasons why is because I've heard him repeating the Russian narratives, and you don't have to even comment on this because I don't know if you want to get into this end of the politics, but I threw in the towel with that guy because there was a video a while back where he started talking about the United States is jeopardizing its position of military dominance because we're giving all the most modern weapons to Ukraine, and we're revealing our tactics and our technology on the battlefield so the Russians can figure it all out, and then we're going to lose our technological and tactical edge because they'll be able to figure out all of the secrets that we have. And I'm like, you are a freaking idiot. That's not true. The Ukrainians are not getting the newest, latest, greatest technology of really anything. I've said from the beginning, it's all old stuff. Canada, I'm Canadian. We sent old munitions that were out of date or just about to be out of date. We sent those over. Same thing here. It's not the new stuff. It's the old stuff that goes first. And as you said, it's then replaced with new manufacturing, and then we get new stuff to replace it. So the Ukrainians are doing us a favor by using up the old stock, which we get they're on the hook for it financially, ultimately, in the end, is what we're told. How that plays out in the end, I don't know. I guess it depends on if they win or lose. If they lose, we get nothing, right? And then on the what was I going to say? So they're on the hook for that. We get the new stuff coming in. And there was another point that'll come back to mind as I let you comment on that.
Yeah, no, easily, and don't take this as a precise quote, but like 99% of what the U.S. is sending is old stuff. Right. And a small fraction is new stuff. They do that deliberately because they want to know how it works in a real battlefield environment, right?
Yeah.
So one instance that was useful, we sent them the Excalibur artillery shell. This was supposed to be some big, huge deal. We're sending them this smart artillery shell, and it's going to hit exact targets. And the thing turned out to be worthless. Russian electronic warfare jammed it, and they just landed as duds, right? Mm-hmm. But that's actually a good thing to know because you do not want to get into a live war battle with this ammunition and then find out it doesn't work. So, multi-$100 million program, and by sending a few of them to Ukraine, we find out, okay, this was maybe not a good idea. And so a lot of countries are sending Ukraine kind of their prototypes, finding out what works and what doesn't as far as defense. And they're doing this, so many countries are doing this because Russia is an aggressor state and they have a lot of enemies and everyone knows that they might be next.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is we are paying in a way, but not really, with our treasure, right? But it's the Ukrainians are paying the real price because they're paying with their blood. The blood of their young people. And in that way, they're doing us the ultimate favor because a lot of them, thousands, hundreds of thousands, are paying the ultimate price for freedom.
Yep. And the only way through this is through, right? You don't, if we stop, there's a lot of bad arguments that, oh, we'll just appease Russia with a piece of Ukraine. Won't happen, will never happen. In fact, if this Trump deal for a ceasefire, if it went through, which I don't think it will, I think Putin will outright reject it. But if it did, it would be because Putin would pivot to a new target. He has really no other choice. He's converted entirely to a wartime economy. So he has to consume another nation in order to keep his going. He's already killed about 1 million of his own men, a couple million more. The most educated, the best of Russia have fled because they don't want to have their lives thrown away in the meat grinder. And good for them. I really applaud some of the real heroes, or those who were brave enough to stand up alone to the Russian regime within Russia.
Yeah, you mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about Alexander Dugin, Russian philosopher, because you mentioned Russia's need, or Putin's need, to consume other nations in order to survive. And this Russian philosopher, who is described by many as Putin's brain, who has considerable influence over, has had considerable influence over Russian foreign policy, says precisely that in his books. I am reading right now his first book, The Foundations of Geopolitics. And in there is this is an actual quote from his book, where he says that Russian expansionism is this is a quote, an existential necessity. So I would like your view on this argument that Russia is the victim, that the reason they had to go into Ukraine with a full-scale military invasion was because of NATO expansionism, which represented to them an existential threat. When I'm seeing on the other side this political ideology, which Dugin describes or characterizes as, I would say it's neo-Eurasianism, and it says that Russia must expand, that it's an absolute existential necessity. And I can get into a little bit more of that with you. But first, I'd like to get your views on NATO expansionism and what you think the real reason, the cause of this war was.
NATO expands on the part of governments voluntarily, right? It's not forcing people in. They are choosing to join in. And actually, not that long ago, before Russia started all its expansionism, which really started kind of in the late 90s when they started rattling sabers. Before that, when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of countries were thinking of going away with NATO. France once left NATO command. They came back, but they wanted to go their own European way. So it's not this one hegemon. It is a mutual defense pact. And it is because of Russia, right? Whether it's Dugin or the other 700-year history of Russia. Russia started out as a small little duchy of Moscow, and through 700 years of conquest, becoming a colonial empire, it has grown to becoming the world's largest nation. Now, people don't understand that. Like, well, the U.S. is a great power, it's a great military, but most of its expansion came through land purchases, including from Russia after it lost a war. The military protects the market, the economy, it protects the economic growth of the nation. And as much as America is an empire, it's an economic empire, and it needs to protect trade to be that empire. That is not the Russian model. That has never been the Russian model. Russia never looked to trade. It has never been a focus of theirs. Russia takes has always been the Russian model. Either by threat, you're going to give this to me, and maybe I'll give you something for it, but you're going to give this to me. It's never asked as a question. It's never barter. It's a command. You're going to give this to me, or I'm going to take it. That's the Russian model, and that's the way it's been with countries. I mean, when Russia invaded the Baltics during World War II, the Baltics didn't pose a threat. And if you go back to Stalin's talk at the time, he expressed that the Baltics were a threat. But they're a threat because they won't give us what we want. And that's what it is. If you're not giving in to Russia's demands, if you're not accepting our bullying and giving us what's yours, that's the threat. Because we don't know how to make stuff. We just know how to take stuff. And it's not just bad for the world, it's a poverty for Russians too. Russians are very poor people. Despite a country that spans 10 time zones, has over 100 million people, their economy pre-war was the size of Italy's. Italy is not a great economic power in Europe. It's a nation full of really old people that is, kind of a poor nation in Europe. And this is their model. You take stuff. You don't make stuff, you take stuff. And once they've consumed Ukraine, or whatever they get from Ukraine, it'll be on to another nation. If they win in Ukraine, they won't even pause before taking Moldova. If they don't, right now, it looks like their other deal is that, they're eyeing Georgia. That's why they're stirring up the government there. They've already taken a couple pieces of it, like they did with Ukraine, and they're ready to take the rest if they can. But that won't be enough. They need to consume. The famous quote is, the problem with eventually socialism runs out of other people's money. Mm-hmm. Russia needs to keep taking other people's money. They're not a full socialist government anymore, but what are they, right? Who can tell me what the Russian government economy model is now? Dugin can.
Yeah, and in fact, I've got a clip of Dugin here. And if you learn about Alexander Dugin, his ideology really takes fascism and communism, the two worst ideologies in history, and mashes them together. He's thinking he's taking the best of both and combining them to create a fourth political ideology. Fourth political theory, I think, is the correct term that he uses. But it's fascism and communism coming together, which I've been saying for a long time. I'm witnessing this. I've been calling it communo-fascism for a long time. This is one of the architects of that, and it's playing out in Russia right now. And he states in the book that I'm reading right now, The Foundations of Geopolitics, and in this clip, he explains exactly how he views Ukraine, which is that it really isn't it's not a legitimate state and not a legitimate nation state, and that it just should belong to Russia, and they're just gonna, as you said, David, take it. Here he is, in his own words. Don't take my word for it. This is Putin's brain. Alexander Dugin, philosopher. He lays out the whole plan here in about 30 seconds.
Without Ukraine, Russia cannot become once more the empire. With Ukraine inside of Russian zone of control, it will become empire once more. That is a kind of law, nothing personal. This war or military operation, special military operation in Ukraine is about that. It is about geopolitics.
There it is. I mean, that's words right out of his own mouth.
You won't get much more honesty than that out of Russian leadership.
No, and that is the guy that they call Putin's brain. Putin kind of keeps him a little bit at arm's length, but if you read his book, listen to what he says in his interviews and in his speeches, the whole plan is laid out and it's playing out. You can see it. It's right in front of us, if you care to learn about it.
Yeah, and for me, I don't care to be a part of the empire. I don't care to be a part of the clash of empires. He says Ukraine isn't a legitimate state, and his reason for that is, imperial. It's not a taker. It's not a great power. But I have a different view of what makes a state legitimate, and that is the consent of its people, right? And Ukraine has the consent of its people, right? We may not agree with their way of life, all the decisions they make. I know there's a lot of complaints about the way that they do a draft and so on, but that's their decision. That's their nation. Their people have come together and decided that. I'm actually impressed that in the middle of a war of this intensity, that they've left men under 25 exempt from conscription. That, impresses me that they're protecting the young men. Russian draft, by the way, goes down to 16. And up to 70.
Wow. And they've raided the prisons. They're bringing in foreign soldiers, which they deny. But listen, we're going to take a quick break. And while we do that, I've prepared something very special for our friends over in Russia, which I don't think that they'll like very much, because this is sort of a political satire. This is in honor of Mr. Dugin and Mr. Putin. This is Putin and the Brain. Pinky and the Brain? Yeah. Well, this is the same sort of thing on a geopolitical scale.
Gee, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
Same thing we do every night. Try to take over the world.
Putin and the Brain. Putin and the Brain. One is a genius, they're both insane. Plotting every night to spread the dark domain. It's Putin and the Brain, 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 brain. From Moscow's iron gates to Eurasia's plains, they whisper of conquest, unbreaking chains. Dugin the philosopher, Putin's Rasputin, dreaming of empires, they're shooting and looting. With the map of the world and the nuclear game, their vision is brutal domination, their aim. Mother Russia rises, the West shall fall. Their tanks are rolling, hear the cold winds call. Putin and the Brain, Putin and the Brain. One is a genius, they're both insane. Plotting every night to spread the dark domain. It's Putin and the Brain, 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 brain. Threaten the world, cries the Brain with a plan. Through chaos and war, we'll rule every land. Putin nods gravely, his eyes cold and grim. Occult power, terror, or killed every Ukrainian. Our philosopher's rhetoric, Azar's heavy fist. Spinning dark dreams, no freedom can resist. Through the Baltics, the Black Sea, the Arctic cold cloud, our empire will rise as the rest fall down. With missiles poised and a chilling refrain, obey us or perish, their echoing claim. From Siberia's tundra to Europe's halls, they scheme and they threaten to liberty's stalls. Putin and the Brain, Putin and the Brain. One is the genius, they're both insane. Plotting every night to spread the dark domain. It's Putin and the Brain, 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 brain. Will the world resist or bow to their might? Will the Brain's mad visions turn day into night? One thing is certain, the quest not to maim. Beware the duo Putin and the Brain.
And there's a level of hypocrisy that I see with Mr. Dugin too, because as much as he talks about the need to get back to traditional values. He also dabbles in the occult, as you saw a reference made to in that video. Throw it over to you for a comment, David.
I don't know. The video kind of speaks for itself, but it's not just Dugin. It's not just now. This is kind of the sad, long history of Russia. And what he's doing now is not really different than Rasputin in the past, a century ago with the Tsar. Russia is Europe's last colonial empire, right? And it needs to end for the good of the Russian people, really. Just like the collapse of the British Empire was good for the UK, it was good for Canada, it was good for Australia and everyone. The collapse of the French Empire was good for France and its colonies. The same thing needs to happen to Russia. It needs to stop holding on to people and land by force, and it needs to seek to build prosperity instead of living by tearing down everyone around it.
Yeah. What other ground were we supposed to cover tonight? Yes, we still need to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Romania and Georgia too.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about Russian expansionism, which I think is truly at the core of the motivation that we're seeing coming from Putin. That's really what is the cause of all this. And you said they'll move on to the next country. It looks like they already have in many ways.
Yeah. They've always got multiple kind of pans in the fire. One central, but then they've got other nations that they're working on. Russia has so many territorial disputes. I think people don't realize that when the republics broke away, Russia seized parts of Estonia and Latvia. A few years later, they seized parts of Georgia, right? They have territorial disputes with China, even their supposed ally. Japan, Finland, all sorts of nations. We're not just disputes. This isn't just, where the fence is. This is Russia has been actively moving the fence a little bit at a time. And just nobody's fighting them. Nobody's pushing back. So they keep pushing further. They get emboldened. They take a little more. And finally, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they've overstepped. And this is really the best chance, I think, for the future we have to stop them. Because if this is successful, Russia will be further emboldened and they will continue with their wartime economy, and it'll be someone else. They just had a massive operation in Romania. The courts threw out the elections because the fraud was so systemic. There was not one thing they could fix. There was, they're like, okay, was this wrong? Can we fix this sector? Can we recount this? No. There were so many types of fraud, and it was so extensive. They just said, we're just going to do all of this over. And what happened in Romania was some people who were polling like nowhere, we're talking like 1%, suddenly got a huge infusion, not just of Russian money, but outside support, huge TikTok campaigns by international personalities and so on to rocket them up. There was advertising campaigns that were completely based on fraud, lying to the people. So much that as soon as it was over, some of the Romanian officials left the country before they could be indicted for fraud. So it wasn't just wrong, that they knew they were wrong because they evidenced it by leaving immediately. And now Romania is, they're doing what will hopefully be the right thing, doing it over and cleaning up their election process so it's in the open and legitimate. In Georgia, we just saw the opposite end of that, where they had an election that was full of fraud, but their courts didn't overturn it. They kind of just shrugged and said, okay, well, we had more people voting in some districts than there were registered voters, but, things happen.
And this is what we're seeing on the streets tonight, and have been seeing exactly these kinds of protests now for, I think over 20 days.
Yeah.
And this is the public response to what we're seeing to be corrupt elections. And this, again, is because the people want to, they're really looking for more integration into the EU rather than doing, having more ties to Russia. They want to pivot away from that, which is exactly what happened in Ukraine. Is this basically Ukraine 2.0 playing out?
It really is. The difference here is the timing. And people need to realize Georgia's a little country. I don't know it offhand how many it is, but it's just a few million people. So they have no chance really to stand up to Russia normally. And they didn't back in 2008 when Russia took a couple bites out of Georgia. But now Russia is so absorbed in losing this war in Ukraine that they can't even keep a small country like Georgia under threat. So the people are rising up. They're of a nation that's just a few million people. There are hundreds of thousands of people coming out protesting. So you're looking to upwards of 10% of the nation is protesting and shutting things down. This is not some little protest. It's not a few people. It's not a fringe minority by any concept of it. And
and this, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the Russian-aligned Georgia Dream, they've responded with violence, a lot of violence, but they've just been overwhelmed by the number of protesters. So we'll see what happens, whether they'll up the violence and whether they'll have to fight back like the Ukrainian protesters did, or if they'll stand down and let there be free, fair, and open elections.
Yeah, and just yesterday, Vladimir Putin held what they referred to it as his annual news conference, and I did watch some of it, and he was just repeating the same, NATO expansionism. This is my red line. The United States keeps crossing it. It's the U.S. and the EU. They're really the ones attacking us. The same whole thing, and he also repeated the line that Ukraine was really overthrown in a coup d'etat in 2014. I want your take on that too.
It's kind of interesting because Russian propaganda has you believing that anytime the people stand up or democracy works, it's a coup, and that the only real legitimate government are these authoritarian dictators like Bashir Assad, right? His strongman in Belarus, the one, or his one in Kazakhstan. These dictators, that's real leadership. And when people want democracy, that's a coup. The coup for Russian propaganda just means the will of the people, right? So what happened in Ukraine, the reason the president fled the country was impeachment. That's not a coup. That's not an armed insurrection. In fact, he was the one who led violence. There was a huge protest, again, to be part of Europe, to leave the Russian sphere of control. They like to use the fascist term sphere of influence. You'll hear that a lot, and that comes directly from, the fascist doctrine of World War II, USSR and Nazi Germany carving up their spheres of influence. But no, people wanted to escape that. Their Congress said, okay, you've gotten too violent, you've broken the law, we're going to impeach you. And he fled to Russia. And he helped Russia invade Ukraine, right? Turning people against him. And since then, there have been 2 elections that have been independently monitored and are agreed to be some of the most free and fair elections that Ukraine has ever had. Does Ukraine have corruption? Yes. Every country has corruption. My home state here of Washington State has corruption. Corruption kind of goes hand in hand with government to some degree, But the most corrupt country, by almost any measure, is Russia, and they corrupt all the countries near them. And a lot of the Ukrainian corruption has been, traditionally, because of Russia. It has been Russian corruption, Russian bribes, Russia getting into the government and making it work in illegal ways, right? And as Ukraine gets rid of the Russian influence, they are becoming less corrupt, more open government, more democratic, listening to the will of the people more. And that is a good thing. Unfortunately, they're paying a very heavy price. But I hope that we can enable them that price that's being paid with the sacrifice of lives, Ukrainian as well as international volunteers. I hope that they are able to buy freedom. And it would be a shame if we, because of unreasoning fear or because a belief that we will save money, turn those sacrifices in vain, right? And it's a false belief that we will save money, because there's no way a rising Russian war threat saves us money in the long run.
Yes, and, you know, speaking of corruption, in 2014, as I recall, the EU was offering Ukraine a financial aid package because they were in financial distress. Russia had a counter proposal that was on the table. The recording of Victoria Nuland with, what was his name? Victor Pyatt, was it?
Mm-hmm.
What, you know, that is a recording that is released and is being used by the pro-Russian side. But when I've looked into it, they're adding context to have you take it out of context. The U.S. government was there. Yes, they were like the EU.
Well,
they were part of the EU, kind of making a sales pitch to
let's
Ukraine.
be clear. By there, it was Victoria Nuland, right? So it's not. The Russia wants to portray that we had all these secret CIA troops on the ground, and there's nothing like that.
Right. So they were preparing to make their pitch for the economic aid package, and they were talking about who the players were and who might help them kind of put their proposal out there. That's what they were talking about. As you know, here's our proposal, and the one of the key points in the EU proposal, which was a much smaller economic aid package, but in order for Ukraine to qualify, the EU said, and the United States was part of this, they had to deal with issues of corruption. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to integrate more with the European Union, and there wouldn't be a bailout package. I remember that. So this is how. But again, David, and maybe you have views on this, but as all of this was playing out, and even before that, I think one of the reasons that we ended up in this war is because you had Russian oligarchs who had financial control over a large portion, the vast majority of the resources, the assets inside Ukraine, and they didn't want to let that go. That's about the money. They flip that around and say that it's just the evil, greedy U.S. corporations. But in fact, Russia had asserted such a high level of ownership and control over the resources in Ukraine over time. They didn't want to lose they didn't want to lose the Ukrainian piggy bank, which historically has always been there, because Ukraine is not only the bread basket for that part of the world with its rich agricultural land. It's strategically located with the Black Sea. They have the port in Sevastopol, so it's rich in just its location. Plus you have all that industrial capacity up in Donetsk, which Putin wanted to control as well. And ultimately he seized that years prior, Crimea and those areas in Donetsk.
Yeah. You know, speaking back, something that's always kind of amused me is that people talk a lot about, Hunter Biden and Burisma and all of that. And seems that people never look it up, that Burisma is a Russian corporation that was operating in Ukraine. So when Hunter Biden wasn't working for the Ukrainian government, he was working for a Russian corporation, a petro oil corporation that was selling refined products through Ukraine. Their interest was not in protecting Ukrainian independence. It was in bringing Ukraine under the thumb of Russia. And it wasn't just the Bidens. There was, others there. Mitt Romney's son was also on that board, so on. You can, it's all public information. You can look it up. Victoria Nuland, that famous phone call, people need to listen to it because she wasn't talking to the protesters. She made that call. She was working with the Yanukovych government. She was trying to defuse the situation with the protesters and keep Yanukovych in power, right? Obama administration was not trying to get rid of him at all. The Obama administration ignored Putin's invasion and annexation of Crimea and ignored the invasion of Donetsk. It refused to honor our treaty with Ukraine to contact the UN and secure them. And Obama blocked all weapons transfers to Ukraine. It was President Trump who approved the first weapons transfers to Ukraine. And somehow here, a few years later, people have this whole situation in their mind backwards because Biden took a different position. That's the interesting thing here in US politics. You can talk about Democrats and Republicans, and when it comes to domestic issues, just saying the party name pretty much tells you where they stand. But when it comes to foreign policy, it doesn't really give you a clue, right? Because the policies of Biden, Obama, and Clinton, when it comes to foreign policy, completely different from each other. Policies of Trump, of Bush, of Reagan, again, completely different from each other. So this isn't really a right or left issue. And it's because of that, it's one where a lot of congressmen, even more than usual, listen to voters, listen to people. So, and this is my plug as an advocate out there for more people to get involved in advocacy. They will listen to you. It does make a difference. You may not even believe as I believe, but hopefully you care about your country, about your way of life, and you need to talk to them about the importance of how we live in the world, right? Because we are not independent, Let me go right here. I have a phone sitting next to my desk, and that was made with parts from Asia, guaranteed that those semiconductors came from Asia because we're not making them, right? Global trade improves my way of life. And that's what I want. I want a world where we live in free trade, free markets, without violence, because that's how we become more prosperous. War is waste. And we have been fortunate, myself included, to live in a unique period of human history. Because you can look through thousands of years of human history and you will see wars of conquest after wars of conquest. People's lives upended and prosperity ruined. And since the end of World War II, we've lived in a unique age of relative peace. Not without war, but without the large-scale wars of conquest that destroy everything. And that's what's different now. That's why this is really important, because Russia is starting up the old wars of conquest. That's their old model of survival. And we should refuse to go back to that dark period of human history. Whatever you believe, whatever your political ideology is, let's leave that one in the dustbin. Let's move forward. Let's try to all prosper together.
Great words. And it seems to me that you talk about, their old playbook. They're using those same old tactics in order to bring in what I say. They're the ones trying to bring in the New World Order with BRICS and an assault on Western economies, trying to challenge that, destabilize it, undermine it all. And in that way, I see them actually rebuilding walls, years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I see Vladimir Putin building a wall of bricks, and through these acts of aggression.
Yeah, I don't think BRICS is ever going to be anything. And if it did, if you could get all those countries, if you get India and China to agree on something, then maybe it actually isn't all that bad for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Because most of the countries making up BRICS, don't agree on much. And as they add more members, I often wonder how you ever expect to get anything done. Largely, Russia uses it as propaganda, like, oh, here's this organization. This means the end of the U.S. And no. The U.S. dollar as a world currency reserve is huge. It's not taking any serious dips. It's we're not even close to where it was in the 70s, where it was already the world dominant currency. It's far and above. We could lose lots of percentage points, and it would not have a serious effect on our way of life or on geopolitics. There are room for other competing currencies. Would actually be a good thing, in my opinion, to have a few other strong currencies out there.
Yeah.
This is, in my opinion, it's just more fear mongering. Russia's really kind of alone in the world stage right now. It's got itself, and it's got a few dictators. It doesn't even have Syria anymore, because the Syrian people, with the help from Turkey, ousted their pocket dictator there. And Russian operations from the Middle East to Africa are in threat of collapsing right now, because Russia may lose their logistical hub that was Syria.
Right.
Which in many ways may be a more devastating effect to Russia than all of the U.S. aid that's been given so far. It's a real game changer. But beyond that, Russia's trying to reach out to North Korea, to other dictators like Belarus, and try and prop up a new empire. And this isn't good. This is just, fomenting more war. Now have North Korean troops marching in Europe in preparation to march in South Korea. Have Russia sending new, more modern arms to North Korea. People don't realize that North Korea, for all its threat, has really been stuck on 1950s military technology. They've not been able to advance because, they have a poverty-stricken country. They're just trying to stay in place. And Russia's trying to bootstrap them into destabilizing the Korean Peninsula again. Russia's model of competing with the U.S. is to set up bushfires all across the world, because the U.S. is the global policeman, and we will exhaust ourselves trying to put out all these conflicts. The more conflict, the more loss of life, the more devastation, the better it is for Russia, because they just want to invade their neighbors, to conquer and take over. And the best thing for the U.S. is to step back from being world policemen, to arm Ukraine to win, and step back from this. Step back from the military role to just peaceful free trade and to keep the peace of the shipping lanes, right?
Yes. And with that, we're getting near the end of the broadcast, so I'll just throw it back over to you for a final thought tonight, and then I have another video to run to kind of close out the program tonight. So final thoughts, sir?
The future belongs to those who show up, get involved, make sure your voice is heard. There are lots of different ways of doing that. For Americans, I just advise to call your representative, call your senators. Give them politely a nice piece of your mind. And I mean it politely. Don't be rude. Treat it like a business, because in many ways it is. You're their constituent, you're their customer. So tell them what the product is that you want from DC. And they may disagree with you, but if you deliver that message politely, then I guarantee they're listening, right? And they're going to do something. Even if, like me, you come from a very different political aisle. I have a libertarian background. I have doors on the left and right. They're open to me, but I'm not a power player at all. I'm just someone they listen to. I'm just a voice. But never underestimate the power of your voice working together with others.
David Wiley, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I'm going to run this special video again tonight for folks, and that'll close things off for us here tonight. And I will see everybody back here tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side.
We watched the old wall crumble, we heard the freedom's call, but now it's rising higher under Putin's shadowed thrall. From Ukraine's fields to Moscow's streets, a cold divide begins to creep. A world of fear where truth is bent, promises are sold too cheap. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're calling Putin's fall. We don't need their blind instruction, we've seen the lies unfold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. He speaks of glory of days long past, where all would kneel before his cast. With tanks and threats he stakes his claim, while silencing those who dare to blame. Propaganda clouds the mind, we don't need no education, blind to the bloodshed and the strife, where Putin's dreams cut deep like knives. Can't you hear the children cry? Can't you see the tanks roll by? In Putin's world where truth is broken, we're just pawns in the lies unspoken. A wall of fear, a wall of light, where freedom fades into the night. We stand upon the edge once more as Cold War ghosts return to life. They tell us not to question, to walk in shadowed lines, but we've seen the fall, we've felt the cold, we know the weight of all their crimes. Ukraine's cries, a world denied, a broken bridge that's left behind. Putin's quest for power's throne, they're building walls we can't condone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're trapped within his thrall. We don't need their false direction, we see through the stories they've sold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they've built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall.